The lock clicked before I could touch the handle. I heard it, that small, mechanical sound, and my hand froze halfway to the door. Outside the window, my daughter's house sat exactly where it always had, the porch light throwing a pale yellow circle across the front steps. Everything looked the same as it had for the past 23 years. The hydrangeas I'd helped her plant along the fence, the wind chime I'd given her the Christmas after her divorce, the welcome mat that still said home is where the heart is, even though half the letters had faded to ghosts. Everything looked the same. So why had James locked the door? James. My voice came out smaller than I intended. James, this is my daughter's house. He didn't answer right away. He was looking at the house the way you look at something when you're trying to decide whether it's safe to approach. His hands were still on the steering wheel, even though we'd been parked for nearly 2 minutes. James Kowalski had been my next-door neighbor for 11 years. I'd fed his cat when he went to visit his brother in Phoenix. He'd shoveled my driveway every winter without being asked. He was 68 years old and retired from the fire department, and he was not the kind of man who locked car doors and stared at houses without explaining himself. James. I said his name again, firmer this time. Eleanor. He said my name the same way. I need you to trust me for just a little while longer. Trust you about what? I need to get inside. My daughter called me. I know she called you. She said it was urgent. She said, I know what she said. He finally turned to look at me, and something in his expression made the words dry up in my throat. James had seen things in 30 years with the fire department. He had a particular way of keeping his face calm when he was actually worried. I'd seen it twice before, once when the Hendersons' garage caught fire, and once when he found out his brother had a tumor. He was wearing that face now. Eleanor, I need you to stay in this car until I tell you it's okay to get out. Can you do that for me? I don't understand what's happening. I know you don't. I'll explain everything, but right now I need you to trust me. I looked at the house again. The porch light, the hydrangeas, the wind chime that wasn't moving because the April air was perfectly still at 5:30 in the morning. 5:30 in the morning. That was the detail that had been sitting wrong in my stomach since the phone rang and dragged me out of sleep. My daughter calling at 5:30 in the morning, her voice tight and strange, telling me she needed me to come right away, that something had happened, that I shouldn't drive myself, that she'd already called James and he'd agreed to bring me. She'd already called James. I hadn't thought about that part until right now. Sitting in the locked car in front of her house, with the hydrangeas and the wind chime and James wearing his fire department face, I thought about it very hard. She called you before she called me, I said slowly. James nodded once. Why would she do that? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because she needed to make sure someone would be with you. With me for what? He didn't answer. He was looking at the house again, and I followed his gaze, and that's when I noticed what I hadn't noticed before. Down the block, partly hidden by the curve of the street, there was a van parked with no markings on it. White, passenger van, the kind with tinted windows and a wheelchair ramp. There was another one on the other side, parked 2 houses down in the opposite direction. My mouth went dry. James, I whispered. I see them, he said quietly. I pressed back against the car seat. 67 years old, retired school librarian. 5'3" and 142 pounds, and suddenly I understood, in a way that bypassed my brain and went straight to something older and more animal, that those vans were not there by coincidence. Tell me what's happening, I said. Tell me right now. He took a slow breath. Your daughter called me 4 days ago. 4 days. She'd been trying to reach you, but she didn't want to say anything over the phone. She was scared someone might be listening. Eleanor, I know how that sounds, but please let me finish. He glanced at the vans again. She'd been contacted by a company called Hearthside Care Solutions, private senior living. They'd been in touch with her multiple times over the past 2 months, telling her that you'd expressed interest in transitioning to assisted living, that you'd had several conversations with their representative and were ready to move forward. The air in the car felt suddenly thin. I've never spoken to anyone from any company like that, I said. I know. I've never expressed any interest in... I know, Eleanor. His voice was very careful. Your daughter knows that too. That's why she started digging. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope, held it out to me. She found these. I took the envelope with fingers that weren't entirely steady. Inside were photocopies, 3 pages. The first was what appeared to be a signed consent form. My name at the top, my address, my date of birth. A summary of a conversation I had apparently had with someone named Daniel Marsh, senior placement specialist, in which I had agreed to an assessment and expressed my desire to transition out of independent living. The signature at the bottom looked like mine. The handwriting looked like mine. I had never signed this document in my life. The second page, James said quietly. The second page was a financial disclosure form authorizing Hearthside Care Solutions to conduct a review of my assets in preparation for care placement. My name again. My social security number partially redacted on the copy, but enough visible to confirm it was real. Another signature. I had never signed this either. The third page was a preliminary placement agreement dated 3 weeks ago. It listed Hearthside's Magnolia Ridge facility in Memphis as my intended placement location. It listed a move-in date. The move-in date was today. I heard a sound and realized it had come from me, a short, sharp exhale, like something had hit me in the chest. I looked up from the papers and through the windshield at my daughter's house, the house where she had lived for 23 years, the house with the hydrangeas and the wind chime, and I thought, she has been carrying this for 4 days. She found this, and she has been carrying it for 4 days, and she didn't tell me over the phone because she was afraid. The men in the vans, I said. Your daughter called the police last night once she had enough documentation. The detective she spoke to told her to act normal today, to call you, have you come, act like everything was routine. They needed, he paused. They needed to catch whoever showed up to finalize the placement. I looked at the vans again. Neither had moved. They're waiting for me to go inside, I said. And then someone was going to come. That's what we believe. Yes. We sat in silence for a moment. The early morning light was doing that pale gray thing it does in Tennessee in April, the sky just starting to separate from the dark, the birds just beginning. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at something it had decided was suspicious. I thought about my life. My house, 11 years in the same neighborhood as James Kowalski, who shoveled my driveway without being asked. My garden, the tomatoes, I started from seed every March on the back windowsill. My library card with 47 years of history on it. I'd gotten my first one when I was 20, the summer I moved to Nashville for graduate school and needed somewhere quiet to think. My routines, my friendships, my Tuesday morning coffee with Margaret from church, my granddaughter's soccer games every other Saturday. Someone had looked at all of that and seen an opportunity. Someone had decided that Eleanor Marsh, retired librarian, 67 years old, widow, grandmother of 2, could be removed from her life with a few forged signatures and some coordinated paperwork. How many people? I asked. My voice surprised me. It was steadier than I expected. The detective thinks at least 4 individuals are involved in the operation, possibly more. And how many others? I turned to look at him. How many other people has this happened to? James was quiet for a beat longer than I would have liked. At least 7 confirmed cases in Tennessee over the past 18 months. Mostly widows and widowers living alone. All of them placed before their families could intervene. 3 are still in the facility. He paused. 1 passed away while she was there. I closed my eyes for a moment. 67 years old, and I had heard the phrase elder fraud before, the same way you hear about earthquakes happening in places you've never been. Abstractly, somewhere else. To other people who were not careful enough, who were not paying attention, who perhaps were already a little confused and didn't notice. I had been paying attention my entire life. I had raised 2 children alone after my husband died. I had managed my own finances and my own health care and my own home maintenance and every other aspect of my existence for 15 years without asking anyone's help except when I genuinely wanted company. I read the news. I knew about scams. I had a very firm policy about never giving personal information over the phone to anyone I didn't know. And someone had forged my signature and scheduled a van to come collect me this morning anyway. The signature, I said. How did they get it so accurate? Your daughter thinks they may have had access to documents you signed at some point, medical records, insurance paperwork, possibly something from the pharmacy or a doctor's office. They've gotten good at this. Good, I repeated. The word tasted like something rotten. Eleanor. James's voice was careful. I need to tell you one more thing. I looked at him. "The man who runs this operation, his name is Daniel Marsh. Same last name as you." He held my gaze. "Your daughter doesn't think that's a coincidence. She thinks he specifically targets people whose names match or are similar to employees or associates he's had in the past. It makes the paperwork look more legitimate, like someone in the family set it up." Something cold moved through me. He used my name. He used your name. So if anyone questioned the documents, it would look like you had a relative helping you arrange the placement. Someone named Marsh, vouching for someone named Marsh. James shook his head slowly. "It's sophisticated. That's why it works." I sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. The calculated, patient cruelty of building a system that turned your own name into a cage. I thought about the woman who had died in that facility. I thought about the 3 who were still there. I thought about their families, their gardens, their Tuesday coffees and library cards, and dogs who barked at suspicious things in the early morning. "What do we do now?" I asked. Before James could answer, the front door of my daughter's house opened. She stood in the doorway for just a second, and even from the car I could see the expression on her face, the particular combination of relief and terror that I recognized because I had worn it myself, standing in a hospital corridor 20 years ago, waiting to hear whether my husband's heart surgery had gone the way we hoped. She was 38 years old, and she looked at this moment very much like the 8-year-old who used to sleep in my bed during thunderstorms. She lifted one hand in a small wave. "Come in. It's okay. Come in." James looked at the vans. Then he looked at me. "Detective Reyes is already inside, has been since midnight." He almost smiled. "Your daughter let him in through the back." "She thought of everything," I said. "She's been thinking of nothing else for 4 days." I looked at my daughter in the doorway. I looked at the hydrangeas. I looked at the vans parked at careful distances down the street, the men inside them who thought this was going to go the way their plan said it was going to go. I thought about how ordinary I must seem to people like Daniel Marsh, how uncomplicated. A name on a list, an address, a date of birth, an opportunity. I thought about how very wrong he was. "Okay," I said, "let's go in." James unlocked the door. My daughter met me at the bottom of the porch steps and wrapped both arms around me before I'd fully made it up the walk, and for a moment I just stood there and let her. She was shaking slightly. I hadn't noticed until I could feel it against my own body, this fine, controlled trembling that told me exactly how frightened she'd been, how long she'd been holding it, how much effort it had taken to sound calm on the phone at 5:30 in the morning. "I've got you," I told her, which was something I used to say when she was small. "I've got you." "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner," she said into my shoulder. I was so afraid of saying the wrong thing, and "You did exactly right." I held her tighter. "You did everything right." Inside, the house was quiet in a way that didn't quite feel like an empty house. Detective Reyes turned out to be a compact woman in her 40s with very steady eyes and a way of standing that reminded me of James in his fire department days. She shook my hand, introduced herself, explained in clear and efficient language what was about to happen. The vans would approach once my daughter sent a confirmation text, part of the protocol the Hearthside people had established. They'd come to the door, they'd have paperwork. They'd expect to find an elderly woman who needed assistance and a family member smoothing the transition. They did not expect a detective, a neighbor who had spent 30 years running toward dangerous situations, and a retired librarian who had spent 47 years cataloging exactly what happened when you let people rewrite history without opposition. "They'll try to say it's a misunderstanding," Detective Reyes told me. "They'll say you signed the forms willingly. They'll say they were just doing their jobs." "I know what they'll say," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "Most people in your position are pretty shaken up at this point." "I'm shaken up," I said. "I'm just also angry." She almost smiled. "Good. Angry is useful." My daughter sent the text at 6:14. The first van pulled up at 6:22. 2 men in khaki uniforms with Hearthside Care Solutions embroidered on the breast pocket. They had a clipboard and a collapsible wheelchair, and a smile of practiced professional gentleness. The kind of smile that was designed to communicate, "This is normal, this is kind, this is for your own good." The second van held 2 more men and a woman who appeared to be some sort of supervisor. She was the one with the real paperwork, a folder 2 inches thick that contained my forged signatures and Daniel Marsh's careful, patient system for turning other people's lives into transactions. Detective Reyes had backup outside I hadn't known about. It was over in less time than I would have thought. The certainty the Hearthside people had worn when they knocked on the door, that brisk, benevolent confidence of people who had done this before and expected it to go smoothly, evaporated with a speed that would have been almost satisfying if I hadn't been thinking about the woman who died, about the 3 still waiting in Memphis. The supervisor dropped the folder when she was told to put her hands up. The papers scattered across my daughter's hardwood floor, 2 inches of forged lives spreading out like a deck of cards, and I looked down at them and thought about all the names I didn't know yet. All the Eleanor Marches who might still be on a list somewhere. I asked Detective Reyes about that later, when the uniforms had been taken away, and my daughter was making coffee, and James was sitting at the kitchen table looking like a man who had been holding his breath for several hours and had just remembered how to exhale. "The 7 confirmed cases," I said. "Can they go home?" "We're working on it," she said. "This arrest gives us grounds to review all of Hearthside's placements going back 3 years. Some of them will have situations that are more complicated, family members who genuinely didn't know, facilities that received them in good faith. But we'll review everyone." The one who passed away, Detective Reyes was quiet for a moment. Her name was Ruth, 71. She was a retired nurse from Clarksville. A pause. She had 4 grandchildren. I thought about Ruth for the rest of that morning, while my daughter pressed a mug of coffee into my hands and sat across from me at her kitchen table and said, "Mom, I need to tell you something," and then took a long breath and said, "I started looking into Hearthside because of the phone calls. But once I started pulling on that thread, I found something else." She pulled out her phone, showed me a screenshot of an email sent from an address I didn't recognize to a law firm I'd never heard of. The email discussed the potential sale of a property. The property address was mine. "Someone had already been in contact with a real estate firm," my daughter said, "about your house, using an email address that was set up in your name but that you never created. They were moving on every front at once, Mom. The placement, the property, probably your financial accounts too. They just hadn't gotten to those yet." She looked at me steadily. "You would have woken up one morning and had nothing. They would have taken everything." The coffee mug was warm in my hands. Outside, the April morning had finished arriving full light now, the hydrangeas visible through the kitchen window, a cardinal on the fence post who had opinions about something. I sat with the weight of what she was telling me and thought about how ordinary this morning looked from outside, how unremarkable. "You found it in time," I said. "James helped." She glanced at him. "He called his contact at the department. That's how we got to Detective Reyes so fast." I looked at James across the table. 68 years old, retired from the fire department, 11 years shoveling my driveway without being asked. "You could have told me," I said. "I could have," he agreed, "but you would have driven yourself over here at 5:30 in the morning and confronted them directly." He was not wrong. "I still might have been useful," I said. He smiled for the first time all morning. "You were extremely useful. They needed you here. They needed to see you walk in, confirm the placement, hand over the clipboard. You were the last piece they needed." The smile faded slightly. "That's also why we couldn't risk them seeing anything off in how you arrived. You had to seem normal. You had to not know." I thought about that. The strange intimacy of being protected by people who knew you well enough to know that you would try to protect yourself, and that sometimes the most useful thing you could do was walk into a room without knowing exactly what was waiting. "Ruth," I said. "Did she have someone? A neighbor? A daughter?" My daughter reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. She had a son. He'd been trying to find her for months. He thought she'd chosen to go. The paperwork looked so legitimate. Her voice thinned slightly. "He only found out the truth last week, when Detective Reyes's team started pulling records. He must have felt." "He's devastated," she said simply. "He's been talking to a lawyer." We were quiet for a moment. The cardinal left the fence post. James wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and looked at the middle distance and seemed to be thinking about things I wasn't quite privy to. "I want to talk to him," I said. "Ruth's son." My daughter looked at me. "Not right now. When Detective Reyes thinks it's appropriate. I want him to know that what happened to his mother, that someone knows what happened. That someone is going to make sure it doesn't get buried in paperwork and procedural language. I looked at my daughter. And I want to know about the 3 who are still there. I want to know when they're coming home. Mom, I'm 67, not 6, I said. I'm not fragile and I don't need managing. What I need is information, and I need to be useful, and I need to do something with the fact that someone tried to erase my life this morning and it didn't work. I looked between her and James. So, what can I actually do? Detective Reyes, who had been standing near the doorway with her coffee, said, "You can testify. When this goes to trial, and it will go to trial, your testimony about the forged documents, about the vans, about arriving at your daughter's house this morning without knowing what you were walking into, that will matter. Juries respond to people who can articulate clearly what was done to them." She held my gaze. "And you, Eleanor, seem like someone who can articulate things clearly." "I was a librarian for 40 years, I said. Clear communication was somewhat central to the job. She nodded once. "Then yes, you can be very useful." The kitchen settled into a quieter place after that. My daughter refilled everyone's coffee. James told a story about the last time he'd been involved in something going sideways, which turned out to be a very different kind of story than this one. A controlled burn that stopped being controlled for about 4 minutes before his crew got it back. And somehow, the story made things feel more normal, more anchored in the ordinary texture of living. I sat at my daughter's kitchen table and looked out at the hydrangeas I'd helped her plant and thought about Ruth, who had been a nurse, who had grandchildren, who had been taken from her life by people who had looked at her and seen only a transaction. I thought about the 3 people still at Magnolia Ridge who would, if Detective Reyes's team did what she said they were going to do, be going home. I thought about Daniel Marsh, whose real name I didn't know yet but who had used mine, who had built a system so careful and thorough that it had worked 7 times before it met my daughter, who had gotten a phone call she didn't ask for and had spent 4 days refusing to do nothing about it. 38 years old. She'd stayed up through at least 3 of those nights. I could see it in the circles under her eyes. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been frightened for a long time and is only now allowing their body to register it. "Go sleep," I told her. "I'll be here when you wake up." "Mom, I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're exhausted and you're coming down from 4 days of being terrified, and your body is going to make you pay for it whether you cooperate or not." I stood up and held out my hand. "Come on. I'll sit with you until you fall asleep, like you used to ask me to when you were little." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized, the one that meant she was about to argue and had just decided not to. Then she took my hand. "James said he'd let himself out. Detective Reyes said she'd be in touch about next steps." The morning was well underway by then, the light through the windows warm and ordinary, the cardinal back on the fence post with whatever his ongoing concerns were. I sat beside my daughter's bed in the chair by the window and watched her fall asleep, which happened faster than I expected. She was out within minutes, her breathing slowing and steadying, the tension finally leaving her face. She looked, in sleep, very much like herself at 8 years old, very much like someone I would do anything in the world to protect. I thought about what it must have taken to hold what she'd been holding for 4 days, to call James, to call Detective Reyes, to make her voice sound normal on the phone at 5:30 in the morning so that her mother would get in a car and drive to a house where an arrest could be made and a system could be dismantled. She had thought of everything. She had kept me safe in a way I'd never even known I needed. I reached over and fixed the edge of the blanket where it had come untucked. Small habit. 40 years old and I was still fixing the edge of her blanket. Some things stay true no matter how much time passes. Outside, the Nashville morning kept going. Somewhere across town, Detective Reyes's team was processing paperwork and making calls and beginning the long, careful work of finding out how far this had reached and bringing people home. Somewhere, Ruth's son was waiting for justice and grief in equal measure. Somewhere, 3 people who thought they had been abandoned by their families were one day closer to finding out they hadn't been. I sat in the chair by the window and stayed with my daughter while she slept, and I thought about how ordinary heroism looks from the outside. How it sits in kitchen chairs and shovels driveways and answers phone calls in the early morning and spends 4 days quietly terrified and does it anyway. How it looks, from the outside, exactly like the life you've been living all along. Before I left that afternoon, I stopped in the doorway and looked back at the living room, the photos on the wall, the wind chime she'd moved inside for the winter and never moved back out, the stack of books on the end table that had been there so long it had become part of the furniture. I thought about my own house. My tomatoes on the back windowsill, probably needing water. My library card. My Tuesday morning coffee with Margaret. All of it still there. All of it still mine. I stepped out onto the porch and James was waiting by the car, as I knew he would be, and as we drove home through the April morning, I watched Nashville go about its business the way it does, completely unaware of what had happened, and what had almost happened, and what, because of two people who had refused to do nothing, had not happened after all. "James," I said, somewhere around the 3rd mile. "Yeah, thank you." He kept his eyes on the road, said nothing for a moment. Then, "You'd have done the same." I thought about that for the rest of the drive. Whether it was true, whether I would have recognized the signs in time, made the right calls, held the knowledge in silence for 4 days, trusted the plan to work. I hoped I would have. I was glad I hadn't needed to find out. When we got back to our street, James pulled into his driveway, and I walked up to mine. And at the top of the front steps, I turned and looked at the house the way you look at something you've been away from, the way you look at something you almost lost without knowing you were losing it. Then I went inside. The tomatoes needed water. I watered them. I made myself breakfast and ate it at the kitchen table and read 40 pages of the novel I'd been working through for the past week. Normal morning. Ordinary Tuesday. Exactly as it should be.